Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Return to Travel, Staying on Top of Travel Risk Management in 2021 and Beyond. I'd like to introduce today's speakers to you. First, we have Matt Bradley, OnSolve's Vice President of Global Security Solutions, and Ryan DiStefano, OnCall International's Vice President of Global Assistance Services. Before we get started, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping rules. Please note that you are able to move, remove, or resize any window on your screen to customize your viewing experience. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type them into the Q&A box, and we will get to as many of your questions as possible. And after the conclusion of the webinar, a brief survey on today's topic will appear. Please take a few seconds to respond and let us know how we did. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt and Ryan.
Thank you, Diana, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is the return to travel. And I'm joined by my good friend Ryan DiStefano from OnCall. And I know that this topic is also of interest to him. And I'm excited to hear his thoughts today. So I'll get to play the role of moderator today, and I'll do an interview here with Ryan. Ryan, we've known each other for a few years. We've seen each other at a few different conferences, had the opportunity to work together for a while. But for those of us who are joining today who don't know you, maybe you could give a little bit about your background and what your role is at OnCall.
Yeah, sure, Matt. Thanks. And first off, again, thanks for allowing us to participate here today. I'm excited about the conversation. It's interesting talking about the return to travel at different aspects during this pandemic, because there's different aspects that come into play. So real quick, I won't bore you with all the details, but I've been with OnCall International for just over 4 years now. When I started, I was the Vice President of our Security Services Division, as that was primarily where most of my background was in. After about a year and a half, I took over a vice president of all our global assistance functions. For those of you that don't know, with an assistance company, that generally means our kind of 24/7 response center, our clinical transportation teams, the security teams, and the staff that are helping on medical, travel, and all security cases. Prior to coming to OnCall, I had enjoyed about a 15-year career in corporate security. I started my career in Boston at Gillette, and Gillette was eventually merged with and bought by Procter & Gamble. And I spent about 12 years or so with that combined Gillette P&G experience in their global security division. Various disciplines from event security to executive protection to supply chain security and crisis management. And then I also spent about 3 years with Liberty Mutual as the security director there, responsible for the command center, the GSOC, if you will, and the crisis management programs and workplace violence. So a good 20-year career in crisis management, security, and international travel risk management. And that finds me here today.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for sharing that background. A lot of great experience in physical security and management of security operations with that focus on global assistance in the past few years. And you and I, so, if we go back to where we were 15 months ago when the pandemic started, of course, it was all about trying to bring people back home after COVID restrictions put in place, stranded people there. And so really, we're talking 15 months now of trying to get back to the return to travel. And so why did we choose today to talk about it? Well, because you guys are ready to get back to travel, right? So as the vaccine starts to get rolled out in different countries, people start to think about international travel again. And so certainly the desire to travel is there. And before people go, the reason why we're talking about it now is before everybody gets back to actual return to travel, we want to make sure that you have a travel risk management program in place. And so that's what we're going to talk about with you today. So the core of that return to travel planning, of course, is about managing the risk of the travel. And then, of course, organizations want to meet their duty of care obligations. So we're going to kick this off with a little audience participation. We're going to try out a poll question here. We've got the question is, when is your organization planning to resume international travel? And you've got 3 answers there. So go ahead and click on your answer. This will hopefully help drive our discussion. We'll just give a few seconds for people to respond, and then we'll react to the results here. I'm going to give you, all right, I can see we've Only got about a third of the people, so I'll give you just a few more seconds. We're up to about 50%. I'm excited to see the results here. We'll just give you a few more seconds. All right. We have about 60% of the people have responded, so I'm going to go ahead and check out the results. All right, so we had about 60 people respond, and it's pretty evenly split between those who are traveling now, so this is international travel now, those who plan to travel within the next 6 months, and then a good third who are not going to be traveling until 2022. I think the thing that's most surprising to me, my first reaction to this, is how many people are actually doing international travel right now. Ryan, I don't know what surprises you of these results.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating to see how evenly spread it is, but it certainly matches with some of the things we're seeing from a case standpoint. And after the pandemic kind of closed in March and April, and we saw travel kind of take a nosedive, we saw it plateau out around October and Q4, and we've just started to see those cases come back and come back in different countries, so not just domestically. So it's starting to match to what we're seeing from a utilization standpoint as well.
Yeah, and what it says to me is, if we take those first two answers there, those traveling now and those within the next six months, we've got 70% of the people attending today who are going to be traveling sometime in 2021. And that means that the time to build your travel risk management program, or the time to dust it off and get it ready for this return to travel, the time is now. So let me just get right on to it. Ryan, what are the key components of a travel risk management program for those who may not be familiar with it?
Yeah, so great. First, I just want to demystify TRM, or travel risk management, as we call it in general. If you take the word travel out of it, it's simply still about risk management. And there's probably a lot of risk managers and security managers on this call. The same principles apply when it comes to understanding your organization's risk tolerance and whether or not you're choosing to accept or avoid certain risks. And from there, the strategies to manage or treat those risks still fall under mitigation measures to either minimize the impact or reduce the likelihood of being exposed to an event. The difference, or the difficulty, I would say, when it comes to travel, and I think what scares people sometimes is now we've added the complexity of international operating environments, foreign governments, language barriers, cultural differences, et cetera, to navigate when assessing those risks, implementing your programs, or responding to an incident like COVID-19. So second, when it comes to like the key components, we generally try to simplify this by breaking it down into three categories: prevention, awareness, and response. So when you talk about key components, under the prevention category, we kind of talk about program components like physical security, journey management protection, travel policies that you have in place, employee education programs, and training. Under the awareness category, we would have program components such as intelligence gathering, risk alerting, and your communications platforms, how people are aware. And then finally, under response, we have insurance programs, third-party assistance and crisis providers, and your crisis management team structure and the drilling of that team. It's also worthy to note, I was just on a call the other day, that there is the International Standards Organization is set to release an ISO standard this fall. I believe it's numbered 31030 on travel risk management, and it suggests an international recommended framework for the best practice components of a TRM program.
Yeah, I think that ISO standard is a long time coming, and I'm excited to see that. I've seen a few drafts as it's been worked on, but I'm excited to see that. I like what you said about the key components of a travel risk management, including both the prevention or the preparation for people before they travel, the awareness when they're on the trip, right? So you take care of people before, you take care of people when they're on the trip, but before they've had an incident. And then, of course, if there is an incident, because we know that even with the best risk management, we're not able to prevent all incidents, that you have that robust response capability. I think in my experience, what I've seen is that people focus a lot on the response. And they say, well, if this happens, what can you do, and how do we do it, and how long is it going to take? And they don't spend as much of that time on the preparation. And I think that one of the things that we've tried to stress in discussing with clients is get people ready, and then you have fewer incidents, right? You still want to have that robust capability, but obviously preparing people before they go means you'll have fewer incidents, which means a better outcome for everybody.
Yep.
So some people might be thinking, well, I don't have a travel risk management program, and I'm not totally convinced that I need one, even if we are going to restart international travel. What would you say are the key benefits for organizations when they do have a travel risk management program?
I love this one, Matt, because, having spent those years in the corporate sector and trying to convince stakeholders or convince the C-suite to invest in a certain program, whether it's travel risk management or workplace violence or what have you, it's all about, kind of telling the story of why it's important. So, we generally like to talk about this one by communicating an organization stands to benefit from having a TRM program by protecting its people, investments, and its reputation. It really should be thought of as a board level risk category that kind of falls under enterprise risk management. And if you break that down, you think about the protection piece, it can be thought of beyond just the simple duty of care we've been talking about for decades. Having a robust program where employees have more opportunities to travel, they feel safer in taking those opportunities, as well as just a general perception the company will keep them notified and well informed. It can be an employee attraction and retention benefit, or perhaps, if you will, even an employer of choice consideration. When we talk about protecting investments, this one hits home usually with the C-suite or your leadership, whatever organization you're in, reducing that lawsuit liability, preventing asset damage, business continuity, and even minimizing uncontrolled expenses due to incidents through having insurance, or even just the ability to operate in an environment where others may not feel safe operating in, or return from a major incident before others due to having a robust program. That's a competitive advantage. And then finally, on reputation, this one to me speaks basically to how the existence of a program, and quite honestly, more importantly, how a company responds to an incident can affect their reputation. My favorite quote, and I've used it in presentations before, it comes from Warren Buffett. Most of you probably know it. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you would do things differently.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think you touched on all of the key benefits there. A few that I want to emphasize is that ability to attract and retain employees, right? We know that we're in a tight labor market in just about every country in the world, especially here in the United States. And, if you're going to hire people and if you're going to ultimately ask them to travel overseas on behalf of your company, then having a program in place like this where they feel protected is going to make it easier for them to do that. And so people who want to go overseas are certainly going to look for these programs to make sure that they're protected. I like the other one you said about having a competitive advantage when it comes to traveling in places where your competition can't, or traveling, more securely, or traveling in a way that allows you to continue your trip even when there is a disruption, right? So if we start to look at it as far as the return on that investment in the travel risk management program, you're now starting to show how you're contributing to the business, not just avoiding a financial liability. So I really like those proactive points around that, Ryan.
Yeah.
So we're going to pause for another poll question here, because we're going to give people an opportunity to tell us how mature is their travel risk management program, right? Let's see if we're being listened to by a bunch of people who are already world-class experts at travel risk management, or maybe some people who came here to learn something and get some advice. So I'll give you a few minutes to answer the question here. Go ahead. How mature is your travel risk management program? Got a few people trickling in. I think one of the things, we put a couple of, I'd be very interested to get some comments from people who answer in the world-class category, although even people that I know who have outstanding programs are constantly trying to improve them, right? So travel risk management program, I'm sure you will agree, is never done, right? It's never finished. It's a continuous cycle of improvement, and how can we do things better, and how can we add additional capabilities to it? So I'll give a few more minutes. Ryan, where would you say most clients are when they, not when they start necessarily, but as they go along? Where would you say most people are in their programs from a maturity level?
Yeah, I generally like to think, using that terminology of the basic, you're going to find that they're checking a lot of the boxes, they're confirming they have some policies in place, we have insurance programs, and maybe we have, one person that's kind of the representative for getting calls about incidents or things like that. But so I generally see programs around there, and then that need a little work, or I want to take it to the next level and get some technology or some travel tracking, or I want to add, some level of additional insurance. So I would tend to think most people fall in there, and especially if they're true about their self-reflection. But what I think also is interesting about maturity, when you think of it, it's, it should be relative to the organization's, size and risk tolerance and culture. Not every organization needs to have a best-in-class program based on their risk, right? Or based on their business objectives. So maturity is also in the eye of the peer network, I guess I'd say.
That's true. Yeah, I agree with that. Well, we've got a good number of responses. Let me see what people said. Well, I think you were right. I think people were falling right there in the middle. We did have a few people who said they have a world-class program. We'd be happy to take comments or questions from them. And then most people in the middle, right? So you've got a few people here who don't think that they need one. I hope that means that they're not traveling internationally at all. Or maybe if they thought they didn't need one now, maybe by the end of this, we can convince them that they do. Need some work. We got a few people out there on that, and then the people in the basic and the advanced. So anything surprising here for you, Ryan?
No, I think that falls right along kind of that bell curve we probably were expecting about it. We're a large chunker in that basic to advanced, have some good, strong, solid, programs, but maybe could use a little extra work, or maybe looking at it now after COVID, are looking at it going, what else can we be doing?
Yeah, I think the COVID component, the pandemic component, was something that gave people an opportunity. Obviously, you stopped travel for a little while, and then maybe you started back with some domestic travel, and now you're starting to wade into international travel. It gave people that length of time without travel, gave people an opportunity to examine their travel risk management programs, or to decide that they needed one and get one built. And if you haven't done so far, then now would be a good time to do that. So I'm glad to see that people are reflecting openly and honestly on their programs. And I would say we always need some work. So I like to see that. So what should organizations consider when evaluating a new travel risk management program, right? So let's just say you didn't have a program pre-COVID, and now you're starting to return and you're thinking that you need one, or you had one and you want to do a little bit of work on it. What should they be considering?
Sure. Yeah, so I think whether you're validating a current approach or looking for areas to improve, like we just talked about, it's no better time than the present. It's certainly unfortunate, but many times that it does take a crisis to get enough momentum to bring about some change. But now is definitely that time to look at it and get some of the buy-in. The COVID-19 pandemic has challenged traditional TRM programs in many ways. I think for some of us, it validated elements that we had in place, and for others, it showed some wide gaps in the program. And for most of us, it probably did show a greater appreciation, at least for answering those questions in advance. So I think for those with an existing program, some of those basic and advanced answers we just saw, a great way to evaluate a program is I think, to conduct a tabletop crisis response exercise if you haven't done one. If the process, if done correctly, it really puts the decision makers through a crisis or a series of crises and battle test the program to effectively uncover gaps or have policy discussions before an incident. Practice like you play, to use a sports analogy. I think another important thing to do is to understand your insurance benefits, or where you may need to want to step in with supplemental assistance is an area to evaluate. I would also encourage you to engage in evaluation with your providers. I'm astonished at how many folks we talk to that say they've never talked to their provider, or they haven't had a case yet, and things like that nature. In fact, using them to coordinate some of these first two items, such as conducting a crisis response exercise or talking to them about the insurance benefits beforehand is probably a really good idea. I think benchmarking with similar organizations, your peers, is huge. Joining, organizations like OSAC and the State Department's Overseas Security Advisory Council to get, tapped into that network and that intelligence, and looking to your technology. We are in a technological age, and information is power. And situational awareness and communication is so vital to managing these types of events that having a reliable and fast and accurate notification in an event system to let you know about issues is really key. This speaks to kind of what we refer to as duty to warn, which is a large part of meeting your commitments. And I would, hazard these generations of employees nowadays expect rapid information access and some level of organizational assistance. And then finally, I think, where we do see probably a lot of failure gaps is making sure your employees know that you have a program and what their role in it is. Since they're the ones that are out there exposed, they're where a program can succeed or fail. An informed traveler is, I think, what we're trying to get to. And an informed traveler is one who's educated on the risks and the policies that are there to protect them, makes decisions that are aligned with those, risk mitigation measures, keeps up to date on things going on around them, and knows how to activate the resources you have in place when they need assistance.
Yeah, those are all great things to consider, Ryan. A lot there. I'm going to actually go back and listen to this recording so I can jot all those things down. That was really good. I want to just highlight a few things that kind of stand out to me over the last year or so. Tabletop exercises, big fan of practicing, as you say, practicing like you play, and doing that, not just once a year, but maybe twice a year, right? I'd say your best practice is minimum once a year and twice a year. I've seen a lot of exercises where people just didn't know what their role was, or they wanted to assume a different role because people wanted to help, and often, too many cooks in the kitchen made it more difficult to have a good outcome. So I think practicing and understanding what roles and responsibilities are and gathering together those information and those plans, right? Exercising a plan to say, where is the plan and what are the steps that we need to take? I go back to my time in the government. When I was in Honduras, we had a coup and the ambassador brought us in with the country team, and he sat everybody down and he said, everybody needs to go back and review the emergency action plan with your office. So I went back in, I called our admin, I said, where's the plan? She brought out this, 3-ring binder that was 5 inches thick and was about 500 pages. And so obviously it was impossible for us to be able to review that plan and put it into place. And so I look at things that are very actionable, very practical, and what is the ability to do that? I think one of the ways to do that is through technology. And with everything that's going on in the world and the changing events and the availability of mass media and social media, technology is really the only way to be aware of everything that's going on in relation to your travelers and your assets. So leveraging technology, I think, is one of the most important things people can do as they're improving or building their program. And you touch on a thing that happened that affected a lot of people during the pandemic. It was their insurance coverage, right? And almost everybody's insurance coverage had a pandemic exclusion. And that meant that when you had people stranded overseas, insurance that you thought was going to cover their return did not. And so you mentioned, perhaps having supplemental insurance or confirming that what your insurance covers before you go, so you don't have surprise expenses, I think is a really good future planning step. We could spend all day on this. I think we could just talk about all the benefits of a program and what to build it, but we'll let people contact us separately and have those consultations with them. So we got a few more questions before we get to the audience questions. So a few of you have put some questions into the Q&A box. If you have questions as we go along, please do drop them in there. If we have time at the end, we'll cover those questions. Ryan, this is the question I've been waiting for the whole time, right? So, of course, you were in the thick of things when the pandemic hit last year. And then, so you saw that stop of travel or the helping people get back. And then tell us about how travel assistance operations have changed in the past year. What kind of cases are you seeing? What incidents are people having? And how are you helping your clients?
Yeah, it's been it's funny. I was talking to an industry colleague that mentored me for a long time. And I started my career pretty much around 9/11. And then all the implications that happened therein. And here I find myself in the midpoint of my career dealing with a pandemic to the likes we haven't seen for 100 years. So just two kind of industry changing events that kind of are not bookmarking my career, but are just very interesting to have been a part of. So when it comes to travel assistance and operations, things we've seen, I think we've really had to embrace the ambiguity and complexity of each case and figure out ways to overcome adversity. It's something you have to kind of do every day in assistance, whether it's medical or a traditional, political or natural disaster. But COVID added a bunch of extra layers to process a case in general. It was also fundamentally interesting to see how the various governments reacted and what that did, how quickly restrictions went into place, then to try to figure out not only how to get things done within those restrictions, but then create mechanisms to continue to do it safely within the guidance as it kept changing, month after month, as people learned new things and as governments took action. So each case really took basically another whole resource just to research and understand how the mission could operate based on all the parameters and restrictions. Not to mention, it's funny, when I was thinking about this question, if you recall a year ago, there was really no testing out of it capability. There was certainly no vaccine, but there was no testing out of it. You were basically stuck with these, either you can't go in or you're going to be quarantined for 14 days mandate, which played all sorts of chaos with logistics and planning and resources. If you think of flight crews and rescue nurses that go into countries and what that does if they're forced to quarantine. So then you move into navigating those testing requirements and what's needed to get into country or get the patients out of country and things like that. And now we're in kind of that vaccination / testing hybrid, understanding. The other thing I think was, so complexity was one thing and all the various nuances and how much they changed, but we also saw a huge uptick in information requests. So we pumped a lot more energy into our proactive assistance efforts due to that rising demand. We had always taken a stance that we thought proactivity was important, but it became, on demand. So while we had our share of assisting stranded passengers, accelerating complex cases, we had this high increase in pre-trip assistance requests, things like benefit inquiries, country risk information, and then, constant questions about COVID statuses and restrictions country by country. Around this time last year, actually, we launched our travel restart program just a few more short months into it that included, an outlook map on COVID country by country with restrictions and case counts, a resource checklist and a toolkit for clients to evaluate those risks, to think about how they could start, entering a country and what it would look like, and a full location monitoring subscription service where we, provided a weekly report on what was kind of going on those countries of interest. We definitely started to see a lot more business in domestic markets, which was interesting, with in-country requests for support because a lot of folks were stranded. So, having a home base in the U.S., we saw a huge increase in domestic. And there was definitely an uptick on mental health related cases. I think you and I, kind of were talking about this, and I expect that to continue to rise as the implications of COVID kind of peter out. I think the final thing I would note, and we continue to experience, and it'll probably continue, is that assisting someone in returning home takes a lot longer these days. Not only is there increased paperwork and permits to receive, but there are continued restrictions and requirements on entry or departure. There are less flights, there are less workers overall, and stopovers, which then create a whole new set of permissions and permits to carry. So while travel is returning and it's great, and I think it's going to continue, it does take things longer, and I think it's important for folks to know that if they are going to have an incident, to anticipate that. And when we
those are all. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I was just going to close with kind of like thinking up the back half of 2021, because I think there is a positive outlook, and I think the need is going to continue to be for information, because I think there's this pent up demand for travel where there's been plenty of articles about it. Businesses want to get back out there. The travel and leisure sector certainly does. We've already heard about student programs that have started for the summer in certain countries that have allowed them to come in. But I think there's going to be this real constant need for information and continuing to stay up real time on what's changing and what's going on. And that's going to continue into the future because of this new greater awareness for assistance and insurance and information relative to risks like this. And the last thing I guess I would say, the one thing that I do worry about is that with the pent up kind of travel cooped up, you might start to see some more risk type behavior or risk tolerance, I guess, by the travelers when they're out there, maybe taking more adventures or taking things not as serious because they've been cooped up for 15, 18 months. So that might be another need for companies like yours and mine and having a good TRM program in place.
Yeah, that's a good point. Business travelers, I think, were already quite adventurous before. And those that haven't traveled in a year, that are used to traveling more often, as you say, might be even more adventurous. A lot of good things there. I agree with everything you said about how things change. A lot more related to domestic information about restrictions. Mental health continues to be an important thing. Not just about it's an important topic, not just related to travel, but obviously we've talked about it many times here at OnSolve related to working from home. So, again, working from home is working outside of the office. traveling for business is working oftentimes outside of the office. Again, you're out of your normal environment. And that tends to exacerbate mental health conditions that people might have. So when you add a mental health condition with the stress of a pandemic or the isolation of a quarantine, it certainly presents more opportunities for complications in those cases. So I think those are some of the things that we're going to see as we go into the second half of 2021. The need for information, I think, is there. A lot of other things have happened in the past year besides the pandemic. Civil unrest in just about every country in the world, in countries that traditionally didn't have as much civil unrest, and that civil unrest being violent in some cases, that now becomes a foreseeable risk in just about every location where people travel. And that's going to be important especially as you get foreigners coming into those countries where they're not prepared or used to that level of civil unrest in those locations. I know that people coming into the United States now would certainly be surprised by some of the protest activity that we have now versus how they would have seen it 2 or 3 years ago. So a lot of what that really drives for me is the need for prevention. Right? We talked about it before, but that increases not just the need, but also the level of preparation that's required before people travel overseas, right? So now it's great that we're focusing on prevention, but it actually makes it even more complicated than it was before.
Yep.
So very, very good thoughts there, Ryan. Thank you so much. This is a question that I got all the time. My previous job, I know that you get it as well. Whenever we go to talk to a client, how can organizations prepare for a medical or security incident abroad, right? We're focusing on this prevention, but hey, when something does happen, as it eventually will, how do we prepare for that? Like what's our roles and responsibilities? And then what can we expect from you on call as our assistance provider?
Yeah, I think, the first piece of advice would be to not wait for an incident, to have a conversation with your providers. What you can expect from a provider is for them to be responsive, certainly. What you should expect in what we've been talking about is for them to be proactive. So, for instance, in addition to normal account management drumbeat with our clients and some of the crisis exercise we talked about, we've also run operational drills with some of them and have them actually call in and speak to a coordinator with a mock scenario and kind of go through what the process is going to be like. And that's been very valuable, not only for them, but I think for us to have that proactive, interaction and relationship. We mentioned understanding your insurance triggers in advance. And that's huge since, we talked about it. You don't want any surprises at the 9th hour, but to know what your options are as well. I recall working with a client during the Hong Kong student campus protests in 2019, where many of the universities were trying to get their students out of country, but were finding the insurance language didn't quite meet the trigger, as there was no real state of emergency or do not travel issued. The triggers weren't, traditional triggers weren't met. So we were able to work within our threat to safety trigger to help a client extract their students within the benefit, making it a much easier decision for them, as an example. I think making sure you understand all of the resources available to you, because many of you might be unaware what you have access to as part of either your insurance or your assistance program. Mental health counselors, legal experts, kidnap specialists. We started dealing with infectious disease isolation pod providers this past year, or even that your communication system has the ability to ascertain somebody's welfare and whereabouts. During COVID, we had to deploy pretty much all of these in different cases, from evacuating COVID positive patients in pods to virtual mental health counseling sessions because in person was no longer available and travelers were stuck abroad. I think certainly when you're preparing, don't underestimate the power of your local organization and the need for what we call ground truth. When things became complicated to move around, and I'm talking right after April, after kind of travel subsided, some people were stuck and borders were closed, the places that we had higher success rates were where the companies had strong local connections and relationships that helped facilitate what we were trying to do. A crisis can certainly be managed from headquarters, but it's going to be executed down on the front line. We had this example, one of them, we had a corporate client at the height of the border closings desperately trying to get their expatriates out of the DRC, which, as you know, is difficult in normal time to operate in, back to various countries in Europe. The challenge was that they were of various nationalities going to different countries, and commercial aircraft had stopped. And the pilots and crew couldn't deplane. Some of the mission lengths meant they had to stop over in other countries. In the end, we were able to charter small aircraft in a couple of different missions with numerous last-minute permitting and landing permission authorizations. But one of the keys to that success was the organizational's local staff who ended up working real-time on the ground with the flight authorities and the governments to get those last-minute permissions. So, to wrap up a long answer is in short, I would say for preparation is to go over these scenarios and work with your peers on benchmarking and your providers in advance. It's all about kind of being prepared in advance.
Yeah, totally agree with that. 100%. What we saw in my experience was the use of the local network was key, right? Our own provider network as well as local contacts and even the embassies, right? The embassies that we work with that we needed to get flight permissions many times from the government. Imagine, nobody is in the office and you're trying to contact a government ministry to get overflight or landing clearance at an airport that's closed. I mean, right. It's unbelievable. And I do have to give a shout out to the State Department in all of the countries where we took people out of. The State Department was super helpful. It's not really what they do, and we don't encourage people to rely heavily on their foreign ministry to pull them out whenever things happen. But I would say in this case, the State Department did go above and beyond. But we also relied very heavily on our local providers, right? Those eyes and ears on the ground. So knowing that you have an assistance provider like OnCall that has a strong network on the ground, preparing, as you say, through scenarios and other planning to be ready before you go, and then maintaining that close communication with your assistance provider before something happens, and then certainly when something does happen. And I like the OnCall model where you have that centralized assistance center where all that communication flows in and out, and then it's your job to liaise with the people on the ground so that me as the customer is not having to figure out who I should be talking to or having to talk to multiple people. So I'm really impressed with that OnSolve model.
I think I'm sorry, Matt, just to expand on something you said, because you're right, the State Department has been great, and they usually go above and beyond what their mission is or what they can and should do at times. But I think it's interesting that in these types of disasters scenarios, for folks to recall that a lot of times, government and first responders are inundated and unable to assist or cannot assist. And so, the importance of having, again, those insurance, those assistance companies, the technology, all the things that you're going to be able to help your own constituents yourself in those scenarios where government resources are tapped out and unable to assist.
Yeah, totally agree with that. The governments are no substitute for having an assistance provider, not at all. Well, we've got a few questions in the box, so we're gonna get close to those. And I just want to, in our last slide here, this is really a reflective question, right? This is a reflective question for our audience members of how will your organization keep travelers safe and informed, right? All the things that Ryan talked about that prevention, about that when they're on the trip, that awareness when they're on the trip, and then being available whenever they do have an incident. So think about your own program, some of the things that Ryan's talked about today, and how you can improve, right? Whether you think you have a world-class program today or an advanced program, there's always things that you can do better. If you think you don't have anything to improve, then you should test that, right? You should test that through regular exercises, and then you should benchmark that against your peers, both by industry, but also by location where you travel. I think it's almost as important to look at your peers in the locations you travel as it is to look at your peers in your industry segment. And then get to know your assistance center, your assistance company better, right? Call them even when there isn't something going on, right? Schedule a meeting with them to get to know them and understand what they're seeing right now and make sure that there aren't any risks that you're missing. Ryan, as we close here before we start taking questions, what final thoughts would you have?
Yeah, I think just with keeping in, we talked about preparing an informed traveler. If I have to use the terminology of like the lowest common denominator of where your problems are going to happen, it's going to be there. So the proactive nature of getting that informed traveler, as we talked about, who's got the mental agility to make good decisions and knows the policies, knows the resources, is aware of the risks, is key to the program. But I guess what I would say before we go to questions is don't just make it a passive program. having country guides in a portal where employees are encouraged to go read is passive. Pushing them to the employees or mandating that they read them and then doing knowledge checks, things like that, pre-trip briefings, policy acknowledgement, so they're part of the equation. I think it should be pushed and governed for completion and not just opted into or just an awareness campaign once a year.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'm told we only have 4 minutes left, so we're going to try to we've got a few questions here, so we're going to try to go quick. Ryan, first question here. I'm a high school administrator and we'd like to get back to our exchange programs. What would you suggest as far as getting back to travel?
Well, I think it goes back to that travel restart component as far as understanding of, number one, can you go? So, is the exchange program allowing for the travel to take place? Do the students need to be vaccinated? Will they need to be tested at routine times? So understanding the requirements of can you go? And then understanding, how the operating environment would be, that you still want it to be a good experience, right? And so if there's a lot of social distancing still going on, venues aren't open, masks are required everywhere you go, those might not be the experience you want the students to have. So we broke this down into kind of that simple, can you go? How's it going to look like if you go? And then the last one, which is the should you go? And that's basically understanding your risk appetite after evaluating those first two.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is start slow, right? Don't think that you're gonna, go back to all the same programs that you might have had in the past. Pick a few countries or locations that are doing good with COVID, that are doing better with COVID, and start there, and then work your way up so you can test all of those things that you just talked about. Great advice. This is an important question that comes up. It says, what is your approach to explaining duty of care to executive management, right? How do they get buy-in at the executive level?
So I've tried to start moving away from using duty of care as a way to convince executive leaders. I think it's become fallen on deaf ears. It was an old OSHA standard that started before even travel risk management was a thing about providing a safe and secure workplace. And that hits with certain check the box components, compliance pieces. I think you want to take it to the next level, which is where does it provide the business value? How does a TRM program enhance your business opportunities? How does a TRM program connect to business continuity? How does a TRM program allow you to do more business or recover or have that competitive edge like we talked about? It's trying to know your audience at the C-suite or at the leadership level and what makes them tick. What is it that they're interested in doing, and how do you align that to convincing them that certain elements of a TRM program are in place? Mass communications is a great example of that, right? It started out generally as kind of maybe a business continuity platform where you're pushing out messages saying the office is closed. Well, now that's matured to the ability to basically go check in on your traveler in some country to say, I'm okay because of said incident. And that's now an employee benefit. So I think taking the full story of why it's a benefit to the employee and the organization versus just an obligation.
Yeah, that's perfect, Ryan. Thanks a lot. We got time for one more question, and answer it quickly, and then we'll wrap up. So what do we feel are the top mistakes, gaps, or areas of improvement that you see organizations continually make, right? So if people can only focus on a couple of things, what are those things they should focus on?
So for me, it would be on employee education and communication. I think understanding, I mentioned it again, I think they're the ones that are the most exposed. They're the ones that are going to drive the policy violations. So that education campaign, understanding the resources and having it in place in constant communication and them knowing where to go to, I think is where you see a lot of that's where the incidents and then that's where the incident ends up starting to fail at the beginning and even make the incident harder to manage.
Yeah, I think that's a key piece, right? If you've got the buy-in of your travelers, then it helps make everything a lot easier. So, Ryan, great talking to you. The time just flew by. We had a few more questions. I apologize to those who put questions in the chat that we didn't have a chance to get asked. If anybody wants more information about how to set up a travel risk management program, whether or not you should have a travel risk management program, what a travel risk management program looks like, Ryan and I are happy to hear from you. You can contact OnCall or you can contact OnSolve. We have a great partnership where OnSolve provides the technology and OnCall provides the assistance services to create that best-in-class global travel risk management program that people need. So most important thing for us as you guys get ready to travel is put something in place, protect your employees and your stakeholders so that you can continue to travel. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me. I hope this is not the last time we do it. I'm sure it won't be. And everybody else out there, please have a good day and travel safe.